Hades and Persephone is a piece that I wrote after writing with someone else on this concept of these two characters in the same situation as Hades and Persephone. But I really enjoyed just the characters because I was able to explore this topic of life, death, just the way they interact. And it was really nice because of these characters, I was able to put flesh essentially on these two concepts. After writing a little bit with this person, I decided to just go and write the side piece essentially on the story, the characters, and exploring this concept. And so I went ahead and submitted this piece into this college publication, and it ended up getting published in Humid 11, which is this great opportunity for students to go ahead and put in their works, poetry, short stories, and they can get published in the English department. So I had this story lying around, and I decided to go ahead and turn it in. I'm going to go ahead and read from it now as sort of a podcast. All right. I think that there's beauty in it. Beauty in death. The words didn't seem appropriate, coming from her silver tongue. Such dark sentiments from such a beautiful woman. Still his heart stumbled as he drew in a sharp breath. Turning to her, his ocean-colored orbs mixed and swirled with such confusion that whirlpools wouldn't be able to keep pace. Yet she was serious. Her own crystal pools stared out at the population of souls. Their barely visible, haggard forms were as dreary as the rest of the environment. He knew that her refreshing perspective on this life was why he was drawn to her. After she accidentally ate of death's fruit, he told her she was trapped. In a way she was. She was now part of the land and needed time in it to keep her health. However, he had told her it was eternal. The true amount of time he kept to himself. He hadn't said it out loud, but in the back of his mind he knew the reason. The ugly truth. Ugly, for it was weak, even human of him to feel this way. Beauty and death. Usually when I hear that, a soul is planning on joining my kingdom by their own hand. I know this isn't your home, Lady Persephone, but I'm doing all... He was interrupted as she laughed. She had an angelic laugh. Though the woman always seemed to laugh at times he didn't find funny, or smile for reasons he couldn't fathom. The more she did it, the more he dreaded she was either mocking him or losing her sanity. You're doing it again, Hades, she sighed whimsically. Leaning over to drape her arms on the railing, she propped one hand up by resting her elbow on the black metal. Setting her cheek in her palm, her delicate face turned to him. She was smiling again. Doing what? He huffed. Staying so proper and literal when I say something. Get out of your head for a moment. I've seen your side of this coin, death and life, but I want you to see mine, she begged. Her pale complexion was framed by those almond eyes, the earnest expression subtle but apparent. There was a pause as he tried to comprehend her request. See her side. What was there to see? Life was talked about constantly in his kingdom. The beauty, the grace, how it was everything he would never be. Anger stirred in his chest at the thoughts. First, because they all reminded him of how much he was hated, and secondly, because after meeting her, he found them all true. His mind halted as he looked down at her again. Overwhelmed by the complexity of his emotions, perhaps she'd clear them up. Fine, what's your side? He asked bluntly. As his hands gripped the rail, he caught her eyebrow perk. Staying silent, he waited for her. She then tilted her face back over the balcony and spoke. I envy humans. They grow faster than we do. When they fall in love, it is kept more accountable. They are with child sooner. They nurture with purpose. And they strive so passionately in everything they do. Some of them, he muttered, feeling her glare before seeing it. The male gulped quickly, looking away. Right, her time to speak. What I'm trying to say is that they have something we don't. A deadline. An end. While I grant you that is unfortunate in some cases, it is heartbreaking when the young or good fall into unshakable sleep. Death is part of living, just as living is part of death. The silver-haired woman explained, flicking some of the curled river over her shoulder before continuing her thought. When there is a deadline, before it reaches them, they strive to do all they can. It gives motivation to take every sunrise and do something with it. Every time opportunity knocks, they clamber to the door to give answer with the eagerness of a dog. Some take this as a reason to leave something behind to make the next generation better. You're right that some may twist this drive, but what do we do with our countless hours? She questioned, pain leaking into her voice as her eyelids dropped. We make nothing of them. How many quarrels between gods have lasted for centuries? Yes, humans fight, but they all eventually reach a point when they realize it isn't worth it anymore. How many lovers has Zeus and the other gods lavished themselves with, wearing the pain it caused like combat medals? Hades went silent, knowing his brother did in fact brag at times about this. If he weren't so bound to the underground, he could have been the same way. Again, some mortals fail at this, but think of how many succeed. Think of how desperate their hearts pine for someone like them. How relationships between lovers, friends, families, peers, mentors, and even animals mean so much to them, all because they know their time is short. The woman pondered. He, however, was staring at her again. Yes, this care, this love, why did it rile him up to hear about it? As she'd been speaking, he had noticed his hands grip into the bar again, with teeth grating. His temper was building. Now, conscious of it, he had relaxed as best he could while still finding his thoughts murky. Hate. He felt hate towards her words. I know I don't understand it. If I had, I would have cherished my time with my mother more, among others. She wavered with blank eyes. It was the same expression he saw in Soul's regret. And he realized that was what he hated about her, about life, how it caused regret. With life existing, all he did was bring regret, and every living thing hated him for it. However, they loved her. He would mock them, but the most infuriating thing was that he'd fallen for her trap too, keeping her here because he'd fallen for her. Something he did in such confidence just now was building underlying guilt in him. It bubbled to the surface. It wasn't helping that she just praised him either, giving him the greatest compliment by calling what he did beautiful. Beautiful! Death. What everyone envisioned as the ugliest possible scenario, and she'd called beautiful. Maybe he was keeping her here, selfishly, for eternity. As much as he despised the other gods, perhaps he was no different from them. It seemed both above and below the gods hung onto grudges or asphyxiations for all eternity, both of them guilty of not caring who they hurt. The funniest thing about it, her voice cut in, snapping his attention back to her, I think we both act the way we do for the same reasons. Both humans and gods have one fear we both constantly deny. She sat up before stating something that caused his mind to come to a screeching halt. Both of us fear being alone. Alone? Yes, alone, the woman repeated, seeming to ignore the slight crack in his voice, as he stated the fear he'd refused to acknowledge. Humans don't have much time, so they're fervent in finding something to fill the need of companionship. They go to various extremes, from filling their lives with countless people that mean nothing, or holding on to those that mean something. They never go see what else is out there. They start and end things so abruptly just to be noticed or spoken to. Then there are the gods who do these methods too, but while humans are far more prone to move on, gods prefer the other. They latch on to anything they have with someone, let it be hatred, love, sorrow, or what have you, that they drag it on to eternity, wanting to keep some tether of connection to the other. Sure, both humans and gods use each other's methods from time to time, but there is consistency too. Again, he found his thoughts wandering as she said this. Alone was all he'd ever been. The least favorite child that played alone, the one who sent underground to be alone, the one everyone left alone, and the one that was trapped under the earth as much as possible to be alone. After so much time alone, one would think it wouldn't bother him anymore, that maybe he'd found a way to cope. How could he? Fear of being alone was such a weak emotion, such a basic problem that many dealt with. She even confirmed this. Granted, the constant hatred directed toward him wasn't helpful, though he'd lived centuries with it. Why should an old wound be opened now? Besides, he had the dead to provide some company. Attempting to justify himself, he confidently turned his head her way. He faltered. She was staring, and, oddly, it made his heart sink. That expression she wore a number of times while on this balcony, and his emotions stirred, seeing them on her face. If he really was all right with being alone, then why couldn't he bring himself to tell her the truth? To let her go? Do you feel alone? He asked, masking the nervousness in his tone. You admitted feeling it here, she countered. The closed-off shell around her was jarring him. He hadn't seen her wear it before, and it didn't suit. Yes, I've felt it often, although ever since I've had someone trapped down here with me, I haven't felt it hardly at all. She had leaned closer to him. Why it made him so nervous to admit aloud he knew. It was weakness. He was admitting to it in that moment. He had just stated his fears aloud, and hearing them back, they felt even more selfish than before. He flinched, feeling a touch on his arm. Finding her hand there, he followed it to her face. That welcoming, warm atmosphere had returned to her. She was full of life again, pun intended. It's okay. When you're around, I don't feel as alone either. With those soft words and smile, he did something neither of them expected. Drawing away from her, he said nothing. Leaving her confused, he returned to his quarters, locked the door, and did something he hadn't done in ages. Hades cried.